Hey guys, welcome back to another Warframe video where today, as per the request of someone in my comments, I'm going to be running through the different frames that I use for each mission that currently exists in Warframe. Just before we get into things, I do want to say that the Eidolon Duo Guide Part 2 is on its way. It's just taking a bit longer than expected due to other commitments, but hopefully it'll be up soon. But back to this video. As many of you know, I tend to use Vault for a lot of missions, so to make this video a bit more interesting, I'm going to avoid using AoE weapons, like the Ogress and the Brahma, which pair quite well with Vault's speed abilities to make short work of most missions. That being said, there are a few missions in Warframe where Vault excels both in terms of speed and damage capability, so expect to see him pop up at least once. There will also be a number of missions where I still like to use the same frame, even if it's not Vault, so also expect repeats from other frames as we go along. So I think we'll begin with the standard start chart missions that consist of Exterminate, Capture, Rescue, Mobile Defense, Excavation, Interception, Hijack, Assassination, Disruption, Sabotage, Survival, and Spy. So these missions have all been in the game for a good long while now, and they really haven't changed that much over the game's lifespan. So let's get into it. So the first missions we'll look at are Capture, Rescue, Sabotage, and Spy, for which I like to use Wukong. Wukong is an extremely versatile frame that can output a great amount of speed, agility, and utility, making him an ideal choice for missions that don't require a great deal of enemy interaction. What makes Wukong really effective for these missions is his ability to pass undetected and at great speed through sensors, cameras, and lasers, which essentially means using him requires very little thought or awareness. He is also able to navigate tile sets that present challenges to most other frames, as his second ability grants him flight, invulnerability, immunity to knockback, and extra movement speed. Not only this, but where one frame would usually go down, Wukong's passive allows him to avoid death up to 3 times before you have to use your revives, meaning even if you take lethal damage at any point, your play shouldn't be interrupted and you can maintain your speed throughout the mission. Hence, he is an ideal choice for these mission types. Okay guys, so this is the build that we are using for Wukong, and it's worth noting right here that no mods are going to affect the speed of your Cloudwalker, which is your second ability. If you put on any sprint speed mods here, they are only going to help you to sprint, not to go into Cloudwalker and move faster. However, other abilities, such as Volt's second ability, his speed ability, as well as Saren's Molt, which you can put on via the Helminth, which I've done here on my third ability, they do stack additively to Cloudwalker. So they don't multiply the speed bonus, but they stack additively. So Molt, for example, provides us with a 1.5 times speed multiplier, so that's an extra 50% movement speed. Cloudwalker by itself provides us with 300% movement speed, so if we do Molt before going into Cloudwalker, we get ourselves 350% movement speed. Now I've also got on here Preparation, so that our energy pool starts off being completely full. That means that we don't have to run anything like Arcane Energize on here, as we're going to have easily enough energy to see us through every single mission we want to do just using Cloudwalker, because as you can see, the drain on it says it's 0. It is very low. You won't use a lot of energy constantly using Cloudwalker, but you will use a bit. So having Preparation on simply allows us to comfortably get through every single mission without losing all of our energy, so we can maintain Cloudwalker as long as possible. I've then also got Arcane Warmth on here, as the cold status effect does reduce the speed of Cloudwalker, and if you're in a Corpus mission especially where there are cryo barrels littered about the map, and one of them happens to go off, it will slow you down. So this is a nice quality of life tool that you can also put on. But yeah, this is the build for Wukong. Let's move on to the next set of missions we're going to discuss. So following on from that, we'll take a look at Exterminate, and to avoid coming back to the same frame twice, I'm also going to slot in Hive missions here as well. Exterminate is one of the mission types where usually I would use Vault and the Kuva Ogress to simply mow down enemies, but for this video I'm going to offer an alternative, which is Equinox. Equinox has an incredibly high damage output, which, unlike most DPS frames, comes in the form of slash damage. This allows her to breeze through maps and apply bleed effects to all enemies, with the exception of Eximus units that come into her range. What's more interesting about Equinox is that whilst her fourth ability can simply be used passively on standard missions, it can also scale to be used in Steel Path, as it stores up damage dealt up to infinity, which is then unleashed by toggling the ability off. This makes her one of the only frames that can, in some sense, clear Steel Path maps. This detonation is also useful in that it can deal damage to inanimate objects like containers and, you guessed it, Hive tumor nodes. This makes Equinox a no-brainer for Hive missions, as it means she does not need to look around for the nodes, she simply has to detonate her 4th ability. It is important to note, however, that to do this efficiently, you will need a high slash damage weapon, such as the Glaive or Serrata, to quickly stack up your stored damage. It will also benefit you on Steel Path to have an armor stripping ability, such as Necros' Terrify, as armored units suffer greatly reduced damage against slash. Okay guys, so this is the build that I've been using for the Steel Path content. Now you can see that the range here is slightly reduced from 265% down to 220. And the strength you can see is hovering quite low down at 95%. We don't actually need a lot of strength for the Steel Path missions, simply because the damage that we deal to the enemies is going to be built up over time by our 4th ability. We're not going to be dealing great deals of slash damage from just its passive effect. It's more how much damage we build up, and obviously that's going to change a bit depending on our strength, but not a whole lot. So 95% is just fine, and then to top that up, I'm running Molt Vigor, and I'm also running a Modile here for Sling Strength, which is going to add another 40% ability strength as well. So with that, combined with Molt Vigor, we get 45% ability strength plus 40, so 85% extra ability strength. And this is also going to assist our Terrify. So you can see right now, the Terrify armor reduction is about 57%. So once we add on an extra 85%, this goes up to 180% strength, which will then top this up to about 90% armor reduction. And then we're running Corrosive Projection for an extra negative 18% armor reduction for a full armor strip on Steel Path. So that's how that's working out, and once the armor is removed, our 4th ability, when we come to detonate, deals incredible damage, and as you can see, just wipes out enemies instantly. I'm also running Rolling Guard on this build, as Equinox is a very squishy frame. She takes a lot of damage, so on Steel Path, we need to be very careful, particularly when rolling into large groups of enemies where we want to detonate our 4th. So this is something I would recommend having, as well as Peaceful Provocation to up your strength even further if you would like to, as then you will not have to keep casting Molt Vigor and your Sling Strength. So that's the build for the Steel Path stuff. The build for the Hive missions is very similar, but we've just upped the efficiency and the range slightly, and you don't really have to run Molt Vigor or do your Sling Strength for this, as killing the tumor nodes actually requires very little damage. I think you need about 3,000 in total. So as long as you stacked up that amount before you reach the next tumor, you should be just fine. Okay, so the next mission I have on my list here is Interception, and for Interception missions, I like to use Nova. Nova's 4th ability makes her an incredible crowd control frame, which is very important for Interception missions. The slow applied from it means that enemies take far longer to reach the capture points, and that gives us ample time to run around the map and clear out the enemies where necessary. Nova also benefits from a great deal of tankiness from her 1st ability, which can offer up to 90% damage reduction. This can be sustained if you have access to the Augment mod for this ability, and Nova's 4th ability also makes enemies more vulnerable to damage, which stacks with other procs such as Viral to make enemies incredibly weak and easy to pick off. Okay guys, so this is my Nova slow build that I like to use for Interception missions. You can see there is a slot missing here. I do need to format this once more, or maybe even twice actually, in order to fit on the Augment mod, which I don't actually have to hand right now. But if you were to fit on a mod, I would recommend putting the Augment mod in this slot right here. But as you can see, we are built solely around duration for this build and a bit of strength. As long as your strength is at least 150%, you should be completely fine, as the Molecular Prime slow percentage caps out at 75%, which is reached once you have 150% ability strength. So past that point, you can go ahead and you can put on whatever other mods you feel comfortable with. I have gone for max duration, as duration is actually what affects the range or the radius of the outgoing wave of Molecular Prime. So range only affects the explosion radius, as you can see there, the red number from Molecular Prime, not the radius of it. So max out duration, don't max out strength. Everything else geared towards energy and efficiency, and we've got Energize here for, again, more energy, and Guardian for extra durability. Enemy Radar, useful tool. You don't really need Corrosive Projection on this build. It does enough damage as it is, but Enemy Radar does help you to find targets on the map For missions like Interception, you can hunt them down quite easily. I've also used Helminth to put Nourish onto my second ability, which is going to allow me to inflict viral procs, as well as increase the amount of energy I get back from energy orbs. So now we're going to look at survival, mobile defense, and excavation missions, which I like to complete casually using Necros. If you're looking to farm resources long-term in survival, Necros is viable, but my preferred pick is Cora, and I do have guide videos on farming with Cora in my channel, so go and have a look at those if you want to see them. Necros, however, is a better frame in my opinion for simply staying alive longer and actually being able to move around in missions. His Shield of Shadows augment allows him great durability, and the shadows themselves act as a distraction, drawing enemy fire away from defense targets, such as those in mobile defense or the miners in excavation. Shield of Shadows also provides complete immunity to knockdowns and staggers, meaning you'll never find yourself caught out from a Fire Eximus or Grenadier Shield unit. He also benefits from his second ability being able to make enemies literally run away and also strip their armor completely. Alright guys, so this is the Necros build that I have been using on my account. As you can see, it is one of the more expensive builds. It uses 6 Former in total, and I've also got a full Arcane Grace and Guardian on here for extra tankiness, and also to help me keep my Despoil augment active for Desecrate, as it makes our Desecrate use health rather than energy, so that's quite an important combination to note. However, it's not strictly speaking necessary if you have access to Equilibrium, as this allows you to convert energy pickups to health, and your health pool should remain relatively high even if you have an efficiency as low as mine, which is 45%. Bear in mind that you can alter this build however you want and make it your own. Just make sure you are comfortable using it, and if you do want to increase either the efficiency or maybe even the range, then by all means do so, because again, you want to make this comfortable for yourself. Don't just copy what I am doing. Your strength doesn't need to be this high either. You could drop that down to around the 215% or 210% mark quite comfortably. However, with my current build not having Umbral Vitality on alongside my Intensify, it's kind of necessary for me to put on an additional mod. So I've put on Blind Rage here, which does have that negative 55% ability efficiency, but that should be just fine when I'm using Despoil, since my third ability is the thing that's going to be draining my energy pool the most. I've also put on Nourish here, which is going to give me an insane damage boost with 182% extra viral damage, and this is going to be increased even further when I use my Sling Strength on Madurai. Since we don't need to stay standing using Unairu, Madurai is kind of the next go-to focus tree that you should be using. And yeah, I should also note that I am using Archon Shards on this build. I've got 2 on casting speed, 1 Tower Forged on Energy Max, I'll explain why in a second, and then I have 2 more on extra health. This is going to benefit my Arcane Grace a bit, as it's going to allow me to get more health back per second on that. But yeah, the Archon Shard for energy is simply to put my energy up to 263. As you can see, casting my 4th ability is going to cost me 155 energy, and casting my 1st is going to cost me 77.5. So both of these combined use a lot of energy, which is why I've upped my energy pool using Archon Shards, as it allows me to cast both of these simultaneously if I need to, and I should never really run out of energy whilst I'm using Equilibrium and whilst I have Nourish active. My energy pool should just basically stay at maximum, especially considering that my Desecrate is going to be using my health pool and not my energy pool. Okay, so next we're going to talk about defense. Now, for those of you who saw my map clearing video last week, you will know that there are a load of ways that you can clear maps, especially at the lower levels, and even on Steel Path with Equinox, as we've seen. But early on in the game, my go-to frame for Steel Path defense missions, and indeed most Steel Path missions in general, was Mesa. Mesa is another frame that excels in both DPS and endurance. Her 4th ability is able to output incredible damage and can be modded to whatever element you need for the factions you're going against, whilst her 3rd ability provides a great deal of tankiness from ranged attacks. Not only this, but her 2nd ability can also stun targets by breaking their weapons, and it also provides a damage bonus at the same time. Alright guys, so this is our Mesa build, and first things first, you probably want to get your hands on an Arcane Velocity, especially if you're considering using this build for Steel Path, plus 120% fire rate to pistols, which our Peacemakers count as, is going to essentially double the damage potential of our 4th ability. I've also got Guardian on here for some extra armor and durability, which is going to help with our 3rd ability, Shatter Shield, where we already get a 95% damage reduction from incoming bullet damage. Now, what this also pairs nicely with is Nourish, which I've put on my first ability, because we are going to be getting shot a lot. And I'm going to let myself get shot a lot, which is going to proc viral on all of the enemies that shoot me and allow me to deal extra damage from my fourth ability as I kind of spin around and bullet jump around the map, as you probably saw me doing in that clip there. So all of these abilities synergize really nicely together, and if you wanted a bit of extra damage, you can see our shooting gallery gives us an extra 52.5% over a duration of a minute. So it's not bad, but we're not going to get any of the crowd control utility out of it, as the radius is only 5.44 meters with this build. Now, you can alter this to suit your playstyle, and I highly urge you to do so. So if you do prefer having more range on your Mesa, then by all means, alter this to your liking. This is just how I like to play Mesa, and I like to just bullet jump around the map, hit my fourth, spray some enemies, and then come out of it and reset. And that's generally just how I play her. So yeah, that's the Mesa build. Let's take a quick look at the Regulator's Prime here, for which I have 2 Former on. But essentially, all you need to know about the Regulator's Prime is that you want to build damage and multi-shot and speed. So I've got Anemic Agility on here for the fire rate. I'm not too worried about the negative 15% damage, because the plus 90% fire rate is going to make up for that quite easily. And then also, you probably just want to put on whatever combination of elements to suit whichever faction you are going against. And that's basically it, guys. Alright, so the next mission we're going to look at before I start banging on about Volt is Hijack. Now, considering that Hijack missions essentially require a large amount of shield and not much else, the obvious candidate for these missions is Hildren. She has by far the highest shields in the game, and her abilities enable her to replenish it very easily, meaning you should never run out during the course of a mission. She also benefits from crowd control on her fourth ability, as well as a way to remain airborne indefinitely, which means we can make use of mods that reduce our damage in this form. Alright guys, so this is the Hildren build that I like to use for Hijack missions. You can see once you reach max efficiency, you can basically just ramp all of your mods into your shield strength. So we've got Vigor on here. You could replace this with Primed Vigor if you happen to have it. We've also got Redirection, Boreal's Hatred, and Alga Accord. Everything else is then geared towards reduction in damage when we are airborne. So Aerodynamic giving us 24% damage reduction, Aviator giving us 40% damage reduction, and then the combination of Boreal's Anguish and Boreal's Hatred giving us a further 40% damage reduction by airborne. Now that doesn't actually make us invincible when we're airborne, because it's actually multiplicative, not additive. Otherwise we'd be taking 104% reduced damage while airborne, and that just wouldn't be fair. So we've also got on here Arcane Deflection and Arcane Aegis. So Arcane Aegis gives us a 3% chance for plus 30% shield recharge for 12 seconds when our shield gets damaged. And that actually procs a lot more than you might think, to be honest. But even in a Hijack mission, as you probably saw in that clip, this doesn't really need to proc all that much. We have easily enough shield to see us through the entire mission usually. Arcane Deflection is simply for if an enemy happens to hit us and apply a slash proc, because they can transfer through shields. Now you could also run Arcane Resistance if you wanted to instead of Arcane Aegis, but I would only recommend doing this if you're going against Grineer units, simply because the Nox units are really the only enemies that are going to be applying that. So Arcane Resistance right here, 102% chance to resist a Toxin status effect. And Toxin is the other thing that can damage you through your shield, so perhaps an important arcane that you could use against the Grineer. You can also throw on your Raxa Kubrau, not your Chesser Kubrau, as they have an ability called Protect, which will increase or replenish your shield, by 300 every now and then. And this actually does proc quite a lot. You might have seen it go off during that clip. So yeah, definitely a nice little tool that you can add to that. And Link Shields obviously gives our Kubrau just an insane amount of shield. So yeah, definitely something to consider. But let's move on to the next frame. Okay, so we have now arrived at Volt. Now, since Volt is the frame I have invested the most time and effort into, you will often see me using him for a number of the missions we've gone through, but there are a few missions that I find Volt to be the go-to either way. Assassination tends to be one. Given Volt's speed and DPS output, you can get to the target very quickly and one-shot them, even on Steel Path. Disruption is the other mission type that I use Volt for. Again, his speed allows you to hunt down the Demolishers very quickly, and then his damage bonuses allow you to make short work of them. I also use Volt for all bounty missions on the plains of Eidolon or Valis and Cambion Drift, as his speed ability more often than not will save you a great deal of time. You probably know as well that Vault is a great frame for dealing with Eidolons, given his shield can buff operator damage and usually prevent knockback. Okay guys, so finally, this is my Vault build. I'm sure I have showed this off in previous videos before. This is the one that I like to use for the speedy missions. And you can see here, we have a strength of up to 371%. And then I've got Energize and Guardian on here just for durability and also to keep my energy pool nice and high. I've then also put Zarta's Whisper on my 4th ability for increased void damage, as well as that little bubble effect that appears on enemies, and it can also pair very well with the Felarx, the Fenmore, and the Latum if you are using those, as it can pretty much double their damage output, so would highly recommend putting this on your 4th. If you don't have access to this, something like Roar or Eclipse would also work just as well. I've also put Shock Trooper on here to augment my 1st ability to give me increased electric damage. This does pair exactly with your strength number, so this will give me plus 371% extra electric damage, so very, very high damage output from this, actually. Everything else geared towards a bit of efficiency and also a bit of movement speed. Corrosive Projection just to bring down enemy armor a bit, although not strictly speaking necessary. You could easily put on something like enemy radar there or similar. So yeah, that's the Vault build. I just want to point out as well, like I said, a very expensive build using quite a few Tau Forged shards here, 3 Crimson and 1 Amber and 1 Asia. And also I want to point out that during that video, I have done a guide video on Disruption already, so go ahead and check that out as I go into a bit more detail on what I'm doing. But we are using Unairu and Caustic Strike to strip the enemy's armor in order to deal even more damage. That was on Steel Path, the one you just saw, so yeah, that is the Vault build that I use, guys. And I, like I said, use this for quite a few missions now. So yeah, I think what we'll do, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to run through. We'll just round out the video in a second here and just touch base on a few of the things that we've maybe skipped over. Alright guys, so I think now we have pretty much covered every mission in the normal star chart, with the exception of perhaps the Zariman missions, but to be honest, you can easily sub in some of the frames that we've already gone through for like the defense missions, you know, the mobile defense missions. They can easily be used in this scenario. So do feel free to obviously play around with the ones that I've already shown and see if you can get them to work here. Or if you have a particular favorite that you like using for these missions, then do let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear that because I am still actually doing these missions in my playthrough. So yeah, would love to hear your guys' opinions on those. As well as that, we didn't have a look at the index. For the index, I do like to use Rhino. Just generally speaking, if you're in solo, he's kind of the way to go. He's indestructible, essentially using his 2nd ability, and he allows you to carry around enough points to get good bonuses in the index high-level missions if you want to do that. And then there's also the Profit Taker farm on Fortuna. We didn't have a look at, really. But I do have a separate guide video on that. I will leave a link down in the description below to my other guide videos, which do include, you know, bounty missions, Profit Taker, Eidolon hunts, all that good stuff. So I'll leave a link down to all of that in the description below if you guys want to go and have a look at any of that. But yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to cover. So hopefully it gives you guys an idea of the frames that I have used and that I do use during my playthroughs and during the Warframe Done Efficiently playthrough, especially. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at for this video. So again, if you guys do have any specific questions about any of the missions or perhaps ones that I've skipped over, I know I didn't look at Arena either now that I come to think of it, but I do tend to use Vault for that now, so you know, bear that in mind. But yeah, if you guys do have any specific questions, like I said, leave them down in the comment section below, and if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. I'll see you later, guys.